So I think as a leader, you have to recognize that vulnerability is a leadership competency, just like innovation, just like calculating EBITDA,
Oh, say that again.
inventory.
Say that again.
Vulnerability is a leadership competency because humility is an outgrowth of confidence. Confident people are capable of being humble people. It's arrogant leaders that are incapable of humility. So the most powerful leader is the one that walks in and says,
Welcome to PivotMe today, Scott Miller.
April, thank you. Thank you for the platform and for the spotlight today.
Absolutely. So I want to dig into your latest book, but before we do that, I would love for you to tell the pivoters a little bit about your transition. You've got this long, amazing corporate career with a company that I know you love, but you made this transition recently. Can you tell us what that was and why you did that?
Yeah, maybe the biggest pivot of my life. So during the pandemic, after 25 years, I chose to leave a 7-figure corporate job that I'd spent 25 years investing in. I left on very good terms and have a consulting contract with the firm. But, the pandemic changed a lot of our values, didn't it? It made all of us kind of think about what's important and where are we spending our time and perhaps where we should direct it. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And I wanted to spend the next half of my career, or the next 20 years or so, really doing things that I was passionate about. And so I decided to make the biggest pivot of all. And I left an executive role in a public company. And now I'm an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, and building my own business and dealing with all those daily struggles and triumphs and setbacks and that all of us live and lead with. So it's been an amazing experience to me. I think it's given me a more multi-dimensional look at how perhaps safe a corporate job is and how risky and rewarding an entrepreneurial role can be as well.
Yeah, the highs are high and the lows are low, aren't they?
Sure. Yeah.
So one thing I would love to know is when you made this transition, Scott, you were doing really well there. Were people on board for this? Were your friends and family going, yeah, Scott, go do it on your own? Or are they going, what are you thinking?
Yes, I think my wife certainly is a stay-at-home mom, very educated and qualified, but she works to run the family home, if you will. It's a full-time job with 3 young boys. So she was very confident in me. I'd thought about it for years. I discussed it openly with the CEO and the board that I wanted to make a transition. They were very supportive of me, primarily because I was transparent and vulnerable about it. I think I had behaved myself into a reputation of being trusted by them, and they felt good about it. Not everything was perfect. There were some high courage conversations and some, sticky points, but we separated very amicably. Like I mentioned, I'm still a very ambitious evangelizer and ambassador for the FranklinCovey company, still host their podcast for them and do different work for them. I think a lot of people were my champion because they were excited for me. They saw perhaps that I was maybe the Johnny Appleseed for their career, kind of taking a step out. I'm a bit of a risk taker. I like to fail. I think failure is probably the biggest teacher in life. I'm not afraid of people watching me fail. For me, there was very little downside, economically big downside, but life is more about that. So for me, I had a lot of champions. At the end of the day, though, I couldn't believe in anybody else or trust anybody else. I had to believe in myself, and I had confidence in my skills. I know I've been humbled a few times since then, but overall, my contribution has been well received. So yes, it was sticky. It was messy. There were some clean parts, but I haven't looked back, and I think it was the right decision.
Yeah. So there was there a particular moment that you're like, it's time to make the jump?
Yes. I read Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers. I think it's the best leadership book ever written. And Liz Wiseman identified how, as leaders, we are both multipliers and we're diminishers of others. In fact, she names 9 specific accidental diminisher tendencies. And I read that book and I said, I need a break. I've been leading people for 30 years. And I think they needed a break from me, and I needed a break from them. And we're all still very good friends. They come to my launch parties for my book, so I consult and support them. But I think I needed a break from the grind of leading people for 3 decades, hiring and firing and interviewing and high courage conversations. I was burnt out.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to retire on the job. I respected them all too much. I could have easily skated on for 3 or 4 more years and collected a fat paycheck and, done a decent job, but life's too short to do anything less than excellent, including failure.
Mm-hmm.
including making mistakes that you learn from and can teach others through. So I think it was Liz Wiseman's book Multipliers that was the impetus behind my big pivot.
Wow. That's awesome. It's amazing when you can actually pinpoint something.
Yeah.
I love this concept of this high courage conversation. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think it's one of the top roles that a leader has. I think a lot of leaders fall into the trap of thinking their job is mission and vision and values. Yes. And systems and structures and strategies. Yes. But I think the two top jobs of a leader are to recruit and retain quality talent. Talent that is, in fact, noticeably, palpably better than your own, is to check your ego and hire people who are more competent than you are and keep them. Second, I think the biggest gift that a leader can give to any of their employees or team members is feedback on their blind spots, facilitating high courage conversations that may require you to move outside of your own comfort zone to discuss the undiscussables. Might be about their performance or their interpersonal skills, might be about their personal hygiene or about their inability to take responsibility for their mistakes, any number of things. As a job, this is one of your top two contributions, is to have the courage, balanced with diplomacy, to discuss anybody's blind spots and how you can help them overcome them to serve not just your company, but perhaps their next employer as well.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Scott. So when I think about this high courage conversation, so if someone's listening right now and they're faced with a high courage conversation, and then I want to discuss your books, I'm super pumped to talk about that. Yeah. But if someone's faced with, I need to have a high courage conversation.
Yeah.
Do you have any techniques to share?
I do.
Any ways to? Okay, let's do it.
I do. First, reframe it. Not I have to, I get to. Because most of us dread these. I get to be an influence in this person's life. I get to sit them down and discuss some of their own self-defeating behaviors. I get to build in them a bigger self-awareness that's going to improve their contribution, their brand, our business. Reframe it as I have to I get to. Mm-hmm. This is the gift you're giving them. Second, I think you should be very deliberate and not confusing facts with your own emotions, opinions, and feelings. Both of them are legitimate, but oftentimes as leaders, we fall into the trap of masquerading our feelings and opinions as facts. So you should use the right words. Last week in our team meeting, you said this to Alicia, and that was very diminishing to her. Versus, I feel like you're disrespectful to Alicia. So be very thoughtful about giving feedback based on facts and opinions. I think it's important for you to give redirecting feedback and reinforcing feedback. All your feedback cannot be critical. Make sure that you are consistently giving people reinforcing feedback. Excellent job, do more of that, and also reinforcing feedback. Less of this and more of this.
Now, is that in the same conversation? Like, are you talking about the whole sandwich thing?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I know that I'm all caught up into the sandwich thing. I get it. I know it. I've done it. I violated it. I perfected it. So, no, I think sometimes you just walk in and you say, April, thank you for coming in today. I need to have a high courage conversation with you.
So you set the expectation. Okay.
Say that.
Okay.
I need to have a high courage conversation with you. My intent is not to embarrass you or diminish you or to minimize you. In fact, my intent is to help you understand there are some certain behaviors that you're engaged in that are both minimizing your contribution and your brand. And quite frankly, they're holding our company back. My intent is to help you build the skill set to where you can have a very successful career here. And in fact, I might even use the wrong word, so I might need a do-over. But April, I'm noticing that on every Monday's meeting, that when it comes time to review your contribution, you often have an excuse of why it's not done. And like many of us, we tend to fall into the trap of blaming others or providing excuses. But I need you to know, you get the point, right? That you declare your intent. You discuss the fact that your job and your role is not to embarrass them or minimize them, but you want to help them. That you're going to do your best to draw upon facts, not just your emotions or opinions, but you do it in a way that balances courage with diplomacy. Know what it's like to be on the other side of a discussion with you. Someone recently once called me ferocious, and it wasn't a criticism. It was just an analysis of me. And I thought, they're right. I don't know what it's like to be on the other end of a feedback session with me, or what it's like to be married to me. My wife can tell you it's probably quite troublesome some days. And other days she benefits from my ferocity when it's, to her advantage, right? With, someone who's taking advantage of us, or a contractor or landscaper.
Sure.
So I think, ask people, what's it like to be on the receiving side of my personality? What's it like to work with me or for me? Understand your positional power, your voice, your rate, your tone, your pitch, your animation, your physical presence in the room. These are all things that are related and variables to you having an effective influence during one of these high courage conversations.
I love that. I mean, this is Pivoters. That was a framework on how to have every difficult conversation you ever need to have. That was amazing. I love that. So I'm so glad that we went into that a little bit. So,
April, this is a gift you give to your people.
Sure.
People don't quit leaders who love them. And if you could, I say that appropriately, obviously, if you can establish the rapport with those that work with you, that they trust you, they trust your intent, they trust that you aren't going to have a conversation and manipulate them to minimize them, or you're going to then share this conversation later with a member of your team. No, you have behaved yourself into a reputation of being trusted. This will provide you the platform, the basis from which to influence them. But if you are a leader that discusses people's personal business with others, they won't trust your intent.
Sure.
You have to make sure that you both declare your intent, but that first you've analyzed your intent. Is my intent to capitalize on this person? Is my intent to embarrass them? That doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you need to confront your motive before you declare it. Because don't declare your motive as noble or noble, but have your motive be nefarious, because you'll be found out if they're incongruent.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing for successful leadership, for this excellent that you talked about earlier, there's got to be a lot of self-awareness. And I think that's the piece that sometimes we can miss, especially as entrepreneurs. I think that when we're moving up in the corporate space, sometimes we're kind of evaluated for that. But when we're in an entrepreneur space and suddenly we're CEO or founder, we didn't necessarily have all the gates we had to get through to make sure that we had those leadership skills. So what I'm hearing is just a lot of self-awareness, and be aware of what it's like to be in relationship with you.
I'm always shocked when someone comes up to me after a keynote and they'll say, I loved your speech because I'm so self-aware. And I think, yeah, that probably isn't true, the fact that you said that. So stop saying you are self-aware. Stop thinking you are self-aware, and go out and ask trusted people. What's it like to be married to me? What's it like to go golfing with me? What's it like to work a trade show booth with me? That's when you'll become self-aware.
Okay, so let's say you do that, right? I love this idea. So let's say you do that. Then what happens? You get feedback from 5 people, that your spouse, a coworker. Yes. Then what happens?
Well, some things have to happen first. You have to make sure that you create a safe environment for them to tell you the truth.
Sure.
Because most people will lie to you.
Sure.
Not because they're a bad person, because they are a person. So one is, you have to make it safe for them to tell you their truth. Say, I have found that sometimes I'm not received as I perceive I am, and I'd love to know what your perception of is me on this particular topic. Don't give them broad range. Say, in the context in which you know me, what is some constructive feedback you would give me on how I could be better at this, or whatever it is? So
you kind of fall on the sword first, is what I'm hearing, is like sometimes.
I think so.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think you have to make it safe for them to take a risk. And then when they stop speaking, you do not say a word. You don't refute it. You don't explain it. You don't defend it. You don't deny it. You don't say, oh, yeah. But when April's in the foursome, she talks. No. You just write it down. You find yourself in a position where you're writing it down.
Sure.
When they are done, you say, is there anything else? And then you say, wow, that took some courage. Thank you. Thank you for taking a risk to share that with me. That was so valuable. Could I ask you a couple of questions? Sure. When I'm doing that or saying that, what do you think's going on with me? Do I seem jealous? Do I seem threatened? Do I seem scared? Do I seem like I'm in over my head? This is so valuable for me. I'm sure you must have some perception or analysis of why I do that. Could you take it a step further and help me find what situations do I do that, so that I can be more aware of that and avoid that in the future. That's the next step.
Mm-hmm.
The final step, thank them and then let them catch you either not doing it in the future or implementing the new behavior. Let them catch you behaving in accordance with their feedback, because now they will be convinced that wasn't just a fake feedback session, that you really believed it, and then they will become your biggest defender in a different conversation. Because when someone else is talking about you, they will say, that's so interesting because just 2 weeks ago, I found Scott to be really humble in a feedback session. He actually asked me for the feedback. He took it really well. And I actually saw him changing in the next meeting. Yeah. Have you given Scott that feedback? Well, no. Well, instead of telling me, you ought to go tell Scott, because I've actually found Scott quite willing to change. You will create brand ambassadors for you left and right. And you will create detractors if you ask for feedback, interrupt, deny, deflect, defend, and then go back and do the same thing. And they'll say, yeah, never touching that again.
Yeah. So as we're listening, this is not just feedback for business, guys. This is feedback for life. Man, as I'm sitting there thinking about it, first I apply it to me and my leadership ability. I'm sure my team is all listening and going, April, when are you going to ask us for this kind of feedback? I will, team. I will. But I also think about how different my sort of career trajectory would have been if I had leaders like this. If I had leaders that really welcomed this. I mean, how important is it for leaders to embrace this? It takes courage on both sides. Both, you have to create that safe space, but how many leaders are willing to operate at that level of vulnerability? I mean, that's really what I had. Yeah.
I've never had one. I have been that person because I this is expertise of mine. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I told you it's so important. I think it's second most important job as a leader.
Wow.
But if you want to be credible and giving others feedback, you have to set the conditions for them to give you feedback. Because what happens is when you're giving your employee some feedback, they're thinking of all the things that you do wrong. You're immediately thinking, oh, if you only knew, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you have to be a light, not a judge. Be a model, not a critic.
Ooh,
as a leader, your job is to model all the behavior that you want to see in your team members. That's why not everyone should be a leader of people. It is a tough, unrelenting job.
And just because you can do a particular job doesn't mean that you can lead others in doing that particular job. Completely different skill set. Let's just be clear on that. Completely different skill set.
That isn't your job. Your job isn't to be better at someone else's job. Your job is to inspire and lift. Your job as a leader is to achieve results with and through other people, not rush in and save their job, not do their job for them, but achieve results with and through them. And that takes a lot of coaching and feedback. It's different for every person.
For sure.
I heard someone once use on me the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated. No, that's a bunch of bunk. Don't treat people how you want to be treated. Use the platinum rule. Treat them how they want to be treated. Because everybody wants to be treated a little bit differently. And you can treat people differently and still treat them equitably and fairly. But everybody, are you a parent, April?
Yes, I am.
I'm a parent too of 3 boys. Radically different. I coach them differently. I speak to them differently. I give them feedback differently. I treat them fairly and equitably.
Sure.
But just like as a leader, you cannot whitewash your leadership style across everybody and expect for them to assimilate to your style. It's 2021. It's the Great Resignation. They'll quit you in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
They got options. True. And if you don't think your people are being recruited by your competition right now, you got your head in the sand.
Yeah. That's a good reminder. And I love this idea of treat people as they want to be treated because, as humans, we want to be seen and heard and appreciated. And you can give them all of those things as a leader. But first, you have to know what they value. You have to know what their style is and how to best recognize them.
I think the old style of leadership used to be, as the leader, everyone has to accommodate me.
Assimilate to my style.
That has flipped. As the leader, you are now the most agile, nimble, and flexible person of the company, and you are modifying your style to everyone's needs. And if you can't do that, you won't last.
So we're having to pick different leaders, right? Because I think the people that probably you and I grew up with who are leaders, They were not agile. They would have a very hard time with this.
They were the experts in the job that they did.
Yeah.
They were promoted up to the next level.
Sure.
And that's how people became leaders.
For sure.
And that is not how the future of leadership is going to work, even in small startups and entrepreneurial companies.
That's a good piece. Okay.
It's why most founders of companies shouldn't necessarily be the leader.
Yeah.
You might be the owner
because they're the visionary. They're not, they don't have the skills.
You might be the chief innovations officer, the chief brand officer. You might be the person who mortgaged your entire home. That doesn't mean you need to be the leader of people in your company. But you might need a bit of self-awareness and ego to say that isn't your best skill set or job. In most cases, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
No shame in that.
And that's okay.
Strength that is. Right.
There's someone that loves doing that's in their kind of their genius zone. This is a natural ability for them. You don't have to operate all the roles in your company. In fact, if you do, you will bottleneck yourself.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
I think when I look at entrepreneurs that have had some success, perhaps they're into 6-7 figures now, multi-decades, I think the best organizations are where the founder, the owner, is now like the CEO emeritus. And she is on the evenings coaching the CEO or coaching the director behind the scenes. Well, here's what I think I would do. Have you thought about this? And let that person with the people skills, if that's not your natural talent, let them go run the day-to-day. I mean, how many companies have been driven into the ground because the CEO was the engineer or the data scientist or the great salesperson, but their natural strength wasn't recruiting and retaining talent.
That's not their skills. Staff for weaknesses. You have to staff for weaknesses. You don't have to go out and get that skill set. You have to hire for that skill set. You've made a career.
Together.
We should. God, we'd be
You're so smart.
Well, I was thinking the same thing about you, Scott. I also know you're an voracious reader. So we got that like big time book nerd. So many bookshelves in my house. So we have that in common. But speaking of books, you just released Master Mentor. Let's talk about Master Mentors. Let's talk about the book and let's talk about who it's for, Scott. So if someone's listening right now, how do they go, no, this is the book for me?
Yeah. So the book is Master Mentors, 30 Transformative Insights from Our Greatest Minds. I am privileged now to host the world's largest weekly leadership podcast for 3 years. It's a juggernaut for FranklinCovey. I'm honored to be the producer and host of it. After 175 interviews every week without skipping for 3 years, what I realized, April, was that so many of the insights were shared in the 2 or 3 minutes before we went on air, or the 5 minutes after we went off air, or in the green room metaphorically. And I said, oh my gosh, where was that when we were on air? Why didn't you share that? So with their permission, I highlighted 30 of the first 170 guests. The book is in paperback, audio, digital, and print.
Okay.
And there's going to be nine more volumes. There'll be 9 in this every year, another one with 30 more mentors. I picked people from all walks of life. Some are celebrities, some are best-selling authors, some are 4-star generals. Some of them aren't household names, but they have an expertise in an area that is just transformational. But I chose to highlight them. Different races, genders, backgrounds, nationality. The book is for anyone that needs to change. You need to change your results. You need to change your behaviors. You need to change your mindset, your paradigm, your beliefs. The book is very episodic. One chapter talks about brain health. One is about messaging. One is about branding. One is about your circadian cycle, your peak, your trough, your recovery. One is about branding. Some are about extroverts and introverts. It's very episodic. Shockingly, one of my first publishers said, nah, it's too episodic. Well, HarperCollins picked it up. It's been #1 on Amazon. It's category now.
Oh, just HarperCollins? Oh, just them? Okay.
Oh, well,
that's
anyway,
amazing.
Thank you for the compliment. But I think it's for, not everybody's restaurant's for everybody. Not everybody's soap is for everybody. This idea of, a total addressable market is thought up by some, MBA professor. I really think Seth Godin, the marketing genius, who's a friend of mine and one of the 30 mentors, he taught me the concept of knowing your smallest viable market. What is the smallest number of customers, readers, podcast listeners you need to be viable to thrive?
Okay.
So I think this book is for people who are looking for change in their life and they want a short, easy breezy read. It's kind of like Chicken Soup for the Leadership Soul,
Yeah.
where you can read one chapter a night for 30 days. These are
Yeah.
short, funny, breezy chapters where not every transformational insight will you think is transformational.
Mm-hmm.
It will hit you differently if you're just coming off a divorce, or you've just raised more money, or you've just had a setback, or you've just been promoted, or you've just acquired a firm, or your competition is kicking your you know what.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most authors write the book that they need to read. And so many ways I did that as both a parent and a spouse and an entrepreneur, and setbacks and some leaps forward. But I wrote it in a way that I think the busy, fast entrepreneur could read it very quickly. You can start with chapter 13 because that one speaks to you, or go back to chapter 1 or skip to 38. And I wrote them in a way that I think you can immediately apply it into your life by recapping the transformational insight and asking a very provocative question around how will you apply this into your life.
Yes, I love that idea. That's something we do on PivotMe all the time too, is we present an idea in our solo podcast and then we say, okay, now it's time for us to turn the microphone around on you. How are you applying this? So I love how applicable it is. Scott, if a pivoter is listening right now and they're 45 years old, they're a business owner, they've had, some success under their belt, but they know that they're ready for some more change. They've done some work, but they're ready to do some more work, but they're just not exactly sure what that next step is. What's the story that you're like, that's the one they've got to read?
Whitney Johnson wrote several books, including one called Disrupt Yourself. And she's one of the 30 Master Mentors. That's a big podcast. She has a book called Disrupt Yourself. And she uses a lot of psychology and business principles on at what point do we find that we're fatiguing? What motivates us? She has a methodology called the S curve of learning, like a big S on its side, and kind of helping to identify when are you getting complacent? What are the signs? What types of things challenge you? So I would argue that the chapter on Whitney Johnson called Disrupt Yourself, knowing the signs, knowing when are you getting kind of itchy and irritable.
Yeah.
When are you ready for a change? It's a great chapter on just the power of disruption.
Yeah.
I think most people, to quote Rachel Hollis, most people don't fear failure. They fear having other people see them fail. So in many ways, I think it's important to understand what's holding you back. What are the risks that you should take and calibrate? And I think Whitney's chapter might be the best one for that.
It's funny because one of the practices that I do in my own business is I ask, so we talk about all the ways that it could go right and all the opportunities and the upside. And then I say, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen with this project, this initiative, this whatever it is that we're facing? And if we can make peace with the worst case scenario, if we put words to it, once we've named it, it kind of lessens its power over us. So we're like, all right, this is how bad it could go. This is the starfire. Yeah.
To reinforce your point, one of my many guests was Matthew.
Is this
McConaughey.
a many reason why we have to be friends, Scott? Is that what you're about to tell me?
Well,
okay, let's do it.
We are friends because I'm simply validating everything that you say.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
That's my job here. You're welcome.
You are good at PR.
Matthew McConaughey was one of my many guests. He, of course, wrote this amazing book called Green Light.
Such a good book.
As an actor.
Such a good book.
He is an indisputable best-selling author. He's going to be a master mentor in volume 2. And a bit of a spoiler alert. The transformational insight was on the podcast. He said something, I'll loosely quote. He said, one of my friend's uncles, he was, 90 years old, and I asked him what's his biggest lesson in life. He said, how do I recap this? He said, I spent my life basically being paralyzed by thousands of problems that never happened.
Wow.
And I think it's so powerful, right? I mean, as an entrepreneur, I'm constantly living in the future. Like, what could go wrong and what risk? And if they do this and I'll do that. I live in the future. I don't live in the past or the present. That's good and bad.
Yes.
But I think as entrepreneurs, a lot of us live in the future because we're anticipating what could go wrong. Well, if this happens, and there's benefit to that. But there's also a bit of paralysis that comes from always thinking about what could go wrong. To quote this gentleman, I lived my whole life in fear of all the problems that never came true.
It's amazing. And what's interesting is we're not afraid of accidental death or dismemberment. We're afraid of someone watching us fail. It goes back to like the number one fear being public speaking. We're afraid someone's going to see us make an idiot of ourselves, which what's the big deal? But that's what drives so many of us.
I think to recap that point, Gary Keller, as of like Keller Williams, the largest firm in the world, he wrote a book called The One Thing.
It's one of my favorite
books. Excellent book. And Gary says, this is a great question. As an entrepreneur, what's the business that's going to put us out of business, and how fast can I build it? And there's so many ways to apply that into your life, right? What is the business that's going to put me out of business, and how fast can I build it?
Yes.
And that may be a little bit lofty, but you can bring that down, a lot of levels to ask yourself, what are my fears? How legitimate are they? And how quickly can I snuff that out to move on to the next opportunity?
It reminds me of, I don't know who initially coined this, but the whole, when you're talking about your sort of negative thoughts or your fears, is this true? Is this absolutely true? Like asking that question kind of repeatedly, because a lot of the stuff.
I said that. I think
it was you? I thought
me,
so.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen it like in a quote card yet, Scott, but you really want to brand that. Okay. I'll put it on you. Assumed to be said by Scott. So getting into this entrepreneurial world, we talk a lot about self-sabotage on PivotMe. I would love for you to share either something you've noticed in the mentors that you're speaking to, or maybe something that you've personally done that it's like, this is how we're getting in our own way.
Well, I think I kind of said it earlier, which, April, is you aren't the smartest person in the room. Your job is not to be the expert at everything. Your job is to be not the genius, but rather the genius maker of others.
Ooh,
so I think as a leader, you have to recognize that vulnerability is a leadership competency, just like innovation, just like calculating EBITDA.
Oh, say that again. Say that again.
Vulnerability is a leadership competency because humility is an outgrowth of confidence. Confident people are capable of being humble people. It's arrogant leaders that are incapable of humility. So the most powerful leader is the one that walks in and says, I've made a major mistake. This is not the path we should take. I'm open to other ideas, or this is not my expertise. I need to learn that. Ann Chow is the CEO of AT&T. She's number 44 of AT&T's most powerful women in business. She's one of the master mentors. She runs a $30 billion division of AT&T.
Wow.
And she's common for saying, I don't know about that. Teach me about that. I've heard her say this hundreds of times. The CEO of AT&T Business, an Asian American female, the first ever non-white male female CEO in AT&T's history. I've heard her say dozens of times, I don't know about that. Teach me about that. This is vulnerability. This is leadership in action. I think self-sabotage is feeling like you're supposed to be the expert in everything. No, you're supposed to go find the experts, bring them in, let them teach you, and then ignite their genius so that they choose to stay and keep discovering and teaching you more things. Vulnerability is a leadership competency.
Scott, is this something you've always known and always practiced?
No, I had for the last, no. I was often threatened by people, insecure that they knew some things, to quote Rachel Hollis, knowledge isn't power, knowledge applied is power.
It's potential power, yes.
Yeah. And so, no, I'm 53. I've matured a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. One thing I've learned from all of my guests on the podcast and the book is that there's no such thing as overnight success. There's overnight fame, which is fleeting, but there's no such thing as overnight success. And, I was a C-level officer for a decade, before that 20 years in business, 30 years of experience, 30 plus years. Most of us, when we say we have 30 years of experience, we really have 1 year repeated 29 times.
So true.
So I try to reinvent myself and my thinking and challenge my thinking. I champion my mistakes. I wrote a whole series of books called Mess to Success, Management Mess, to leadership success, marketing mess to brand success, job mess is coming out next
these
year.
cards that I
Those
have?
are the cards. They're upside down, April. They're
I saw
upside
you.
down.
Oh God, I had one job, Scott, one job.
I know.
I saw you speak at Rise Business in
Oh, you
Charleston.
did? Oh, thank
And
you. Yeah.
that's the first
Yep.
time I saw you speak.
Yep.
And I was like,
Oh,
oh, it was
I'm
so
honored.
good. Yeah. And
I'm
the
honored.
cards
Thank
were
you.
amazing. Enough that I would carry them around. Well, not carry them around. I mean, let's not overdo it, but
You
they
should.
sit
You
in my
should.
desk. They sit at my desk,
They should
prominently
be sitting
featured.
on your desk, not in your desk. On
Yeah,
your
no,
desk.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll move them. I'll move them.
No, so I've not always had that level of maturity. My
Sure.
wife would say I still don't, but she stepped out, so I can say
Yeah,
thank
it's fine. You can say whatever
You
you
know,
want when she's not in the room.
self-sabotage is minimized when you realize you don't know it all and you're not supposed to. And I tell you, you ignite people's genius. You ignite their engagement when they know you're not trying to be the genius, that you are vulnerable and humble to say, well, I don't know about that. Teach me about that.
Because you're
What should I
leaving
know about
space
that?
for them to come in and like
That's it.
to highlight their own
Can
experience
I
of
share
genius.
a quick thought with you?
Yeah.
One of the mentors is a woman named Karen Dillon. She's the former editor of the Harvard Business Review. Not too shabby.
Sure.
And she co-authored a book with the famed Harvard professor Clayton Christensen called How Will You Measure Your Life? An extraordinary book for entrepreneurs and CEOs. How will you measure your life? The book basically takes proven business principles and applies them to people's personal lives. In the book, they share research from a fellow Harvard business professor that says, now I want all your listeners to listen to this very carefully. The research shows that 93% of organizations that end up achieving financial success do so with an emergent strategy, not the deliberate strategy they set out with. Only 7% of the time is the original idea or the product or the strategy the one that achieves success. 93% of the time, empirically, it's a new idea. It's a pivot. It's a change. It's a disruption. It's, well, that didn't work. So who else has an idea?
Sure.
And I'll bet you these founders and CEOs had an uncharacteristic level of maturity where they were open to feedback. They were willing to change their mind. They were willing to check their ego and sit around and say, well, whose idea was that? Oh, yeah, it was mine. Who's got a better idea? Because that's the kind of person people want to lead. People want to work with. They want to not quit. So I'd argue to all of your listeners, to the extent you are the CEO or the founder, 7% of the time, your idea is going to work, and 93% it's not. The question is, how fast can you recognize it and pivot?
So what I heard is a pivot is necessary for success. At least in 93%, you heard it first here. Pivot's necessary. That was good. I like how you landed that plane. So Scott, let me ask you this. Having had all the conversations you had, both in Master Mentors and also just through, the interviews that you've done, so many of them. Recently I was talking about some of the through lines that I've noticed with my guests, and someone asked me, hey, what's something that you noticed amongst all your guests and, been successful? Where is it? Yeah. So there's certain things like morning routines and things like that just sort of give them this personal edge. But one of the things I said was speed of execution. That's something I've noticed over and over again. Tell me what's a through line that you've seen in these people?
Yeah. I have two. One is an indefatigable work ethic. I didn't say they were workaholics, but they are very hard workers. They recognize that you don't have a right to be in business. You have to earn it and re-earn it every day. That doesn't mean that they work 90 hours a week, but it might be that they do. But they play hard, they work hard, they have life balance. But I've interviewed some of the biggest authors in the world. They're still doing 8 or 10 podcasts a day, 20 years in. Wow. The second is they have an abundance mentality. They genuinely want other people to succeed. They are not scarce thinkers. They coach, they mentor others, they lift others up. They just inherently have an abundant mindset. They don't see the competition as the enemy. They see the competition as somebody you can learn from or partner with. They just have an abundance mindset. They look at life through a different lens, through opportunities. Those are the two through lines for sure.
That's huge. That's huge. I have a couple follow-up questions, but before I go there, I want to ask Scott, where is the best place that you can get Master Mentors? So we've heard the story that we absolutely need to read. We've heard the through lines for some of them. Where's the best place to go to get it?
Whatever book retailer you want to support, whether it's your mom and pop on Main Street, whether it's Amazon because they've been good to you and you own their stock and you have a friend who works there and is earning a good living, whether it's Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. The book is for sale anywhere and everywhere, in digital, audio, and in print. If for some strange reason you love my voice, I do read the audio, so you can get a couple more hours more of me. But
it's on
anywhere
Audible.
books are sold.
Okay.
On everywhere. And it's soon to be turned into a video book. So there's a new publisher called Lit Video, L-I-T Video, that is convinced that the future of book readership is going to be book viewership. So they are selecting up-and-coming authors around the world, and they're turning books into 1 hour long videos. And in 2022, the Master Mentors book will now be an hour-long video that you can watch as opposed to read or listen to.
Is this kind of, I realize I'm mentioning another company, but are you familiar with Blinkist? As a voracious reader, I'm sure you are. Okay. So I love Blinkist, right? Is it like an expanded version of Blinkist, but featuring the author? They probably wouldn't like that analogy though.
No, visit litvideo.com and you'll learn more about it. They're turning all of my books into video books. It's an amazing thing they do.
I love it.
They interview the author and they pull together key stories in the book and they create video illustrations. And it's a remarkable thing they're doing. They are convinced that the younger generation
that's what I was thinking.
Read books by watching them in the hour. I mean, I think they're ahead of the game. It's the YouTube generation. And I don't have any criticism of it. Yeah. I mean, when someone says they read my book, what they mean is, and in many cases now, they listen to it on audio. Sure. It's not how I choose to read. I choose to still buy print books. I've got 7 of them behind my computer right now that I'm reading. It's a new marketplace, and I think they're going to crush it.
I think that Lit Video, it seems like they sat down and they said, what business is going to put us out of the business and how quickly can we create it? And they did. Yeah.
Simon & Schuster should have said that.
Okay. Well, opportunity missed. So last couple of questions. Actually, let me do this, Scott. Where would someone go to connect with you? So we talked about where to connect with your book. What about you?
Yeah. Well, my wife says I'm not hard to find, and that wasn't a compliment. She thinks I'm overexposed.
She thinks you're everywhere.
She thinks I'm everywhere, except for here at home. You can find me anywhere. My website is scottjeffreymiller.com. All of my Inc. columns are on there, all of the interviews. I'm now a host for bookclub.com. And so the interviews are there. You can follow me and connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, soon to be on TikTok, Facebook, Clubhouse. If you're looking for me, you're going to find me.
I'll be there. Okay. So here's our zinger. Are you ready for it?
Bring it on. By the way, your comment about speed to execution should not be lost in my responses, because that's it's the most agile and nimble and fastest people are winning. Don't let your comment get lost in mine.
So Scott, I know we need to have you back on because I want to talk more about leadership. And there's some other nuggets that you shared right before we turned the cameras on that were so good. But I would love us to explore this whole speed of execution thing, because one of the things that was my assessment, but I'll take it a step further and then I'll go back to the original question I was going to ask you. I had shared with one client when she was asking this question, I told her that I've correlated academic success with delayed execution. And that when I'm starting to work with a client and they have a master's degree or higher, I immediately go, well, this is going to take for friggin' ever. And don't hear judgment here, hear experience. So one of the things that I shared when I was talking about speed of execution is that when I went to school, I was originally trained as a scientist. So I have a biology and chemistry degree. There's a whole lot of analytics, right? And what that meant is that I was really good at analyzing all the data. And then I would make overlap, Venn diagrams and peer-reviewed studies and all this stuff. Here, slow execution. And so when I became an entrepreneur, my scientific brain hindered me, because when I would approach something, I'd want all the data. I would want to assess it all. I would want to do a comparison and ... This is not the mark of a good entrepreneur. This is a great mark of an academic or a scientist, not of a good entrepreneur. And so I said that in actuality, my academic career, if you will, slowed my success as an entrepreneur. And so the flip side of that is when someone who's just a gunslinger, they're like, yep, this will probably work. Let's go. They tend to do really well.
As you were saying that, what I was thinking about is FranklinCovey's CEO is a man named Bob Whitman, Harvard MBA, very successful, more money than he can ever spend.
Sorry, Bob.
Very deliberate,
okay,
very contemplative.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the wisest things he's ever said is understand the value of perfect information. And what he means is oftentimes the value of 74% or 86% information is just as valuable as 100%. And he's validating your point is sometimes you need perfect information, right? You're acquiring $1 billion company and they're cooking the books, or you're marrying someone and you haven't checked their credit score, right? Or things like that. There's times when, perfect information is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's times when it's not, and it slows down your execution. So understand the value of perfect information. And I think to your declarative statement, it's probably less than you think, because you need to understand what business is going to put us out of business and how fast can I build it.
Yes. Oh, it's so good.
Gary Keller, not Scott Miller.
For sure. So, and I love Gary Keller and his books and his work. So here's the question. If you could tell the world one thing, what would it be?
Oh, definitely be kinder. Everybody's got something going on. Everybody's got a son who's vaping, a mother-in-law who's moving into dementia, a bill they can't pay. Your marriage isn't as good as it looks on Instagram. Be kinder. People behave the way they do for reasons. Most people are not sociopaths. Most people are not mean or evil. They're just coping. They're trying to get through the day. And if you really knew the backstory, what's going on with them, you would apologize or pre-forgive them. Be kinder.
Wow, Scott, that was amazing. You know what it reminded me of too is the saying that proximity breeds empathy.
Isn't that true? Isn't that true? I heard a quote a few weeks ago, something like this: everything in life is black or white until it impacts someone you love.
So I've heard that. Yes.
And I'm like living my life. It doesn't mean that, I'm a religious person. I have certain opinions on certain things in the world, but it's so true. Everything is black or white until your son comes home and says X to you.
Yes.
And now your whole goal is to keep them alive, to keep them on the right track. I'm getting emotional because I have 3 sons that, are being raised in a very difficult world right now.
Yes.
And so pre-forgive people. Pre-forgive them. Don't just forgive them, pre-forgive them. They say something, you're pre-forgiven. Now, if it's like, illegal or immoral, ethical, maybe you don't. But generally in life, pre-forgive your father-in-law. He doesn't mean to diminish you. He just has the EQ skills of a porcupine. Forgive him.
Wow. What I also heard is it's about them. It's not about you. It's just you could suffer at their comment or the behavior, but that suffer's a choice. Yeah. But you can recognize that it's just their own hell they're walking through.
Nobody makes me sad. I choose to be sad. No one offends me. I choose to be offended. Pre-forgive people and be kinder. You have no idea what's really going on in their life.
That's so good. I have a friend, Mark Keene, that always says, you don't know how much it costs to be that person. And I know it's so good. Mark Keene, it's not mine. It's so good. I hope you got some amazing information from our interview today, and I've set up the next video for you. So I'll see you over there at the next video.